Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL round 24 betting preview for the final round of the season. Going to go through all 9 games, go through who I think is going to win and why, what I'm considering betting in these games, and break down what I think the result is going to be. We're going to look at where the value lies in each of these matches by going through what the odds are, what the odds were last time they met, who's been covering, what the total points lines have been, how the bookies have adjusted based on previous matchups, and all that stuff to give you guys the most information I can to make money betting on the final round of the season. And also, I'm going to still be posting videos right through to the grand final. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of those. We've been in a really, really good run lately and wanting to keep that up and finish the season off strong. I have gone through the previous seasons, what the odds were in the final rounds of the season. There are no real major betting trends, like where you could be like, oh, all the favorites have been winning, or all the underdogs, or all the games have been going over, etc. But the one thing that is apparent going through those games is the teams that should win their games have been winning. With that in mind, what you want to really pay attention to, this is something I do across all sports, and I do it across the AFL every single year, is pay attention to, which teams need to win, who has the added motivation. This is something we've been doing the past few weeks as well. I've been capitalizing on it. But there is a really good article on the AFL website. This is what it's called, Shape of the Eight, where you'll start or finish. And it quickly goes through for each game this weekend, which teams need to win, what the results they need to happen as you scroll through. So it'll just give you that indication, especially as you get towards the Sunday games, especially for the Bulldogs GWS games. Like, for example, if the Bulldogs win, they make the top 8. Otherwise, if they lose, then they need Fremantle to lose their game in order to make the top 8, etc., etc. So have a read through that as well, just to make sure, and I'm going to cover it in this video as well anyway. But just to make sure that you're betting into games with the motivation factor on your side. And that's one of the things I look at. There's probably like 50 different, at least, factors that I'm considering when analyzing a game. Obviously, you're using them in all different situations. But that is one of the ones that is important, especially this time of the year. Effectively, just quickly explain it all in a nutshell though. If Geelong win, they secure their spot in the top 4. If the Brisbane Lions win, and Geelong lose their game, they could get into the top 4. However, that's very unlikely to happen. But Brisbane Lions do need to win to avoid having an away elimination final. And then with Hawthorn, Western Bulldogs, and Carlton, those 3 teams, if they win their games, they're all inside the top 8, regardless of what else happens. If any of these 3 teams lose their game and Fremantle beat Port Adelaide, Fremantle will go in and one of those 3 teams will drop out. For Collingwood to make it, who's the only other side that's potentially possible to make it, however, would be very difficult. They need to beat Melbourne by a very big margin, and they need Carlton or Hawthorn to lose their games by a very big margin. And it's the sum of almost 200-point differential. So it's very unlikely that, that does happen. But obviously Fremantle is the key team playing the last game of the round, depending on what happens with these matches prior. We'll quickly look back at what happened last weekend. In round 23, we had 5 of the 9 games go over, and it really has been the year of the over this season. Regardless what happens this weekend is the final round of the home and away season. Majority of games will have gone over the total. Then home teams covered 5 of the 9 games and won 6 of the 9 games. So a good week for the home sides. If you look at the home ATS records, away sides have the slightly better record, covering in 100 games, and home sides only covering 98 games. So that one could still go either way, but underdogs do have an unsurmountable lead, 107-91. Last weekend, underdogs covered 5 of the 9 games, and 4 underdogs won their games outright. Those sides were Melbourne beating the Gold Coast Suns by 54 points. Then we had Collingwood beating the Brisbane Lions by 1 point. St Kilda beating Geelong by 18 points in a high-scoring game. And then finally, Carlton, who started underdogs against West Coast over in Perth, won by 65 points. Looking ahead to this weekend's games now, when I go through and analyze these games, I'm using a ton of different factors, one of those being the bet finders, which you guys can use for yourself. I'll put the link in the description for access to them. It allows us to go through and compare the attacking and defensive stoppages, possessions, efficiency ratings in attack, defense for the opposition, and where their strengths are by quarter on quarter. So we can go through and analyze by those factors, and then we're also using the betting trends from their previous matchups. First game of the round, Melbourne take on Collingwood on Friday night at the MCG. Collingwood, small favourites here, -6.5, $1.67 on the money line. Collingwood have covered 4 of the past 6 versus Melbourne, so that's covering the spread. Last time they met was round 13 this season, and Collingwood won 89-51. They paid 210 and plus 3.5 in that game, so small turnaround in the odds. That game wasn't all that long ago, and a pretty big win to Collingwood. They've now won 5 of the past 6 versus Melbourne as well. Melbourne snapped a 4-game losing streak against Gold Coast last week, as I just mentioned. Interestingly, even though they did lose 4 games in a row, they were against all top 8 sides during that span. Well, Fremantle's out of the top 8 now, however, they were in the top 8 back in round 19. So it's not like they are losing against, subpar opposition. And then Collingwood have now won 3 of their past 4 and only had a close loss against Sydney Swans. I think Collingwood do win this game. I think it sets up, if Collingwood win, it sets up the round to be that a little bit more interesting, but I can't see them winning this game by a big enough margin to potentially worry the other sides. Like, it really just does come down to the Fremantle Port Adelaide game. But it creates a little bit of interest. Obviously, the AFL is pretty keen on publicizing Collingwood trying to make the top 8. So I do think they get over the line here. They're the team in better form and should win. And don't think they're going to win by 38 points, but I do think they're going to win by that around the 3-goal margin. So I'm definitely interested in backing them. There are a few options that I'm looking at on this game. Also, from a total points perspective, the total is 169.5. It's 8 points higher than when they met earlier this season. And based on this number, I am leaning towards the unders. I do think this total is a few points too high. And the other way I'm considering playing this game is from a disposals perspective. Both these sides give up a high number of disposals to the opposition. Melbourne give up the 14th most, and Collingwood give up the 2nd most in the league to the opposition. So there'll definitely be players you can capitalize on with their disposal markets to go over. How I play disposal markets, just for you guys for future reference, is looking for the sides that do concede a high number of disposals and looking to target players who'll be able to capitalize on that. And then on the flip side, you can't play, like, for example, the disposal markets, there's 15, 20, 25, 30 plus, etc. With the unders on that flip side, you're only generally able to take certain players that have an over or underline in the AFL. So looking at the teams like, for example, the Brisbane Lions give up the least number of disposals to the opposition, then playing unders for certain players against them. That's kind of, at the most basic form, how you can play it. I did post a video probably a couple of months ago now, covering the different strategies when it comes to player props. So if you haven't watched that, definitely check that out. That gives you a bit more of an explanation on this topic. But overall, looking at Collingwood to win, leaning towards the unders at that number close to 170, and then also disposal markets on both teams. On to Saturday, Geelong, big favourites here, $1.05, they're 50.5 point favourites. Need to win to secure a top 4 spot, and I think they win this game comfortably. West Coast, a lot better side on the road than they are at home, and obviously were blown out at home by an understrength Carlton side last week. So Geelong win this game, win it comfortably. I'm not super keen on taking -50.5. I think that's a pretty big number, but there are definitely opportunities with the disposal markets on this game. Both sides, very similar to the first game, both sides give up a high number of disposals to the opposition. Geelong give up the 3rd most disposals to the opposition, and West Coast give up the 4th most. So definitely good opportunities in this game on the disposal markets. Obviously, once team lineups are out, then we can go through and analyze those. Midday Tuesday when I'm recording this, so those lineups are still a couple of days away, or even slightly more than that. Then also for this game, 5 of the past 6 head-to-head have gone over. So it's historically been a high-scoring matchup. Find it difficult to take over 176. It would really rely on Geelong putting up a big score here, which they haven't really been doing since earlier on in the season. Like, their recent matchups, they put up 89 last week against St Kilda. So that's a bit better. But prior to that, 73, 90, 106, 48, 91. So over the past 6-7 games or so, they haven't really been racking up high scores. It is a good opportunity for them going into finals to, have a really high scoring game, get their attack rolling, but I'm just not super keen on it. It is a very high number, but historically this matchup has been high scoring. But I like Geelong to win and looking into some disposal markets. Richmond versus Gold Coast. Bit of an ugly game, this one. Gold Coast $1.55, minus 11.5. Down playing in Victoria. Gold Coast don't really travel all that well this season. Consistently just keep on losing games at home. Their performance last week, their last home game of the season against Melbourne, was really, really bad as well. So it's very difficult to take them with a great deal of confidence. But obviously Richmond have lost 9 games in a row. So they're also really, really struggling. Only won 1 game since round 3. The only 2 sides they've beaten this season is the Sydney Swans in round 3 and then Adelaide in round 13. Realistically, when you look at and compare these 2 sides, Gold Coast should be winning. However, backing them to do that and them actually doing it is another story. They did win their last road game, pretty much knocking Essendon out of finals contention. And, can they do it again? And another winnable game. If I had to, tip aside, I would tip Gold Coast to be winning this game. I don't think there's a great deal of value taking Richmond. Their performance last week against Hawthorn, the game was over at quarter time, but following that point, I think Hawthorn just kind of coasted to the line, so it made Richmond look a little bit better. But they didn't really, they closed the margin at one stage, but then it blew back out again. So lean towards Gold Coast to win. However, don't think that's the best betting opportunity in this game. I want to show you guys, for example, this Richmond Gold Coast game. If we come down here to the quarter by quarter records, you'll notice Gold Coast are the number 1 second quarter side, and Richmond are ranked 17th in second quarters. So potential nice little spot here is Gold Coast in the second quarter. Looking at their handicap there, with a low line for this game, we may be able to get only minus 2.5, minus 3.5 at most for Gold Coast in the second quarter. And I really do like this little situation for them. Also, the other way of playing this game is from a disposals market. Once again, we've got a really high disposal side. Richmond can see the most disposals to the opposition. You can see they're ranked 18th in the league, 381.5. Gold Coast, are a fairly low disposal side. However, they do have players who can take advantage of it and rack up numbers. So we're looking at targeting those players. For this game as well, the total at 174.5. I would be leaning towards the under on that number. This matchup, 4 of the past 5 head-to-head have gone under, and we've got a 7-point higher total than when they met in the opening round this season. And it is the highest total of the past 5 games. And we have spoken previously about Gold Coast struggle to score on the road, so that does set up well for this game to go under. But definitely keen on the disposals. Gold Coast in the second quarter, and Gold Coast should be winning this game. I don't think it's the best possible bet you could make. Hawthorn versus North Melbourne. They're playing this game down in Tasmania. Hawthorn 50-point favourites, total 175.5. Hawthorn just need to win this game to secure their spot in the finals. And I think they really will be winning this game and winning it comfortably. They showed last week, they can show up, get the job done against Richmond. And I think they do again here against North Melbourne, who are coming off a 96-point loss to the Western Bulldogs last week and have only won 1 of their past 6 games. Hawthorn in really good form, only dropped games against GWS and Geelong all the way back to round 10. And this is a really important game for them to get the win on the board. At 50.5, I do think that number is too high. They only met in round 6 this season, and Hawthorn was 17.5-point favourites. Did win, by almost that 50-point margin. 45 was the final margin. But it still is a lot of points to lay for a side that just need to get the win. I think Hawthorn will come out strong and put this game away early. So you can potentially look at them on a first quarter, first half basis. They do have a really good record against North Melbourne. They've won and covered the past 5. And the other way of looking at playing this game is from a totals perspective. I look closely at Hawthorn's team total to go over. This is the bet we hit last week against Richmond. However, at 112, 113.5, that number is just a little bit too high to be taking the overs for this game. So I'm going to stay away from that. But the full game overs isn't the worst bet. I think at 175.5, I'd lean towards that going over. But I think the best way of playing it is taking Hawthorn to win and then looking at some disposal markets. Once again, North Melbourne will bring up the matchup here. North Melbourne concede the 11th most disposals to the opposition, also 11th most uncontested possessions. Hawthorn, are only ranked 9th overall. However, they early on in the season, they're only averaging just over the 300 mark, and in previous weeks have been pushing towards the 400 disposals. Therefore, there's going to be some players that are being undervalued, especially against this opposition. So that's how I'm looking at approaching that game. Brisbane versus Essendon. Important game for the Lions here to win to make sure they secure that home elimination final, especially if Geelong have won early. If Geelong lost, which it's very unlikely that's going to happen, then Brisbane will be playing for a top 4 spot here. They're $1.14, minus 36.5. They have a really good record against Essendon. They have won and covered 4 off the past 5. The issue with Brisbane is whether they can put teams away. The past 2 against GWS and Collingwood, they've had 30-plus point leads and ended up dropping those games. They do face definitely easier opposition here, playing the Bombers, who have now lost 5 of their past 6 games. So really struggled to close out the season when they were in a good spot, a couple of months ago. Sorry if any Essendon supporters are watching. But Brisbane, 36.5 point favorites. I think that line is too high for the Lions here. 6 goals, even though they're at home against Essendon, they still do have plenty to play for. That's still a pretty big number. Last season, the line was 30.5. Essendon playing better this season. Brisbane not as dominant at home as they were last season, where they went undefeated at the Gabba. But this is definitely a big line to lay. Brisbane, I think, are definitely going to win the game. How I'd consider playing this is similar to the Gold Coast game. If we bring up the stats here for Brisbane versus Essendon, and you look at the quarter by quarter, Brisbane are the number 1 first quarter side, both in points for and points conceded. Essendon ranks 7th in points scored and points conceded, and 13th in points conceded. And then also in the second quarter, they're even worse, and Brisbane's still not too bad. It's been the fourth quarters for the Lions where they've really struggled to put games away. So I'd definitely be looking into the Lions for the Lions first quarter and first half overall. Feel like that's the more likely winning bet in this game. Still probably going to have to lay, 15 to 18 points for a first half and over a goal there, close to 10 points for a first quarter, which isn't ideal. It's still a fairly big number, but I'd feel more confident taking those selections than the Lions at minus 36.5 for the full game. And there'll definitely be that motivation to start strong based on the way they lost the game to Collingwood last week. So we have that other factor to help capitalize on that. From a total points perspective, they put this number at 170.5. Interestingly, 8 of the past 9 between these two sides have gone under the total points line. I don't really have any strong lean on this number. If anything, I probably would say it's slightly low. I would expect to see like 172, 173.5. And it is 14 points lower than we saw at the Gabba last season. So there has been a big adjustment, and this is the lowest line across the past 3 meetings between these two sides. So based on those, I'd lean more so towards the over, but not with a huge deal of confidence. You could take Lions to win into an adjusted total to go over, bring it down to 160, 158.5, something like that. And I definitely think that would be a good bet in this situation. Sydney versus Adelaide. The Swans at home here, $1.34, minus 20.5. And I will say, looking at the odds for this game, Swans are priced as though they need to win this game, but obviously they don't. They're locked into top spot pretty much regardless of what happens in any of the other games. So there's not as much motivation for them to win. Now, whether the Swans will rest players or not, I haven't heard any information about that yet. Now, with how the AFL have a bye week before we go into finals, teams are less inclined to rest players in this situation. Do think the Swans, it's not going to hurt them to rest a couple of players, key players to avoid injury going into going into finals in top spot. So definitely stay out of this game. Don't bet early until those team lineups are fully announced. But looking at the matchup from a betting perspective, I am interested in the Crows. So Adelaide's team total to go over 75.5. Feel like they are a chance of keeping this game somewhat close. I think the line should be more so the plus 12.5, plus 13.5, not plus 20.5. But I prefer the team total. So Adelaide coming to this game losing 3 of their past 4. However, they weren't that far away from Port last week in the showdown, only losing by 22 points in the end. But a bit of a low-scoring game. But prior to that, they put up 111 points against the Western Bulldogs, who are a really good defensive side. 85 points the week prior against Geelong, who are also one of the better sides this season and top 4 side. So I think they can, put up over the 75 points and clear their team total. That's probably the way I'm most likely looking at playing this game. Staying out of the Swans to win. Sydney have covered 4 of the past 5 and won the past 5 versus Adelaide. When we look through, they met in round 14 and the Swans were 20.5 points at Adelaide. The reason why I think, this line is higher than it really should be at the minus 20.5 and it should be lower is you look back at round 14, they met at the Adelaide Oval and the Swans were minus 20.5 in that game. Now they were playing a hell of a lot better back then than they are currently. That was when they had won, I think 8 or 9 games in a row and went down there. They won the game by 42 points. However, now back at home, getting the exact same line, but they don't have as much motivation to win this game, win it by a big margin or anything like that. Some of the other factors that help contribute towards the Crows team total to go over, 4 of the past 5 head-to-head have gone over, so this matchup has historically been high scoring. Last time they met at the SCG, or the last 2 as well, Adelaide put up 85 points in round 19, 2022, and then in round 2, 2021, Adelaide scored 88 points. So the last 2 head-to-head at the SCG have been real high-scoring games. And also, the away side has covered 7 of the past 8, regardless of the venue. So the away team does have a good record in this matchup. So, slightest ever lean to the Crows plus 20.5, but see what happens with lineups. And then do like the Crows team total to go over. Onto the Sunday games. Firstly, Western Bulldogs versus GWS. And I think the Sunday games are all going to be really close now. 3 games where they could all go either way. Firstly, the Bulldogs, 15.5 point favorites here at $1.43. They have a really good record against GWS, winning 6 of the past 7 head-to-head. However, GWS have won 3 of the past 4. This is a really, really good game. Both sides come into it in really good form. Bulldogs coming off a near 100-point win last week and have won 5 of their past 6 games. And then GWS, one of the form teams of the competition, have won their past 7 coming into this. Both sides have plenty to play for. Bulldogs need to win to lock in a top 8 spot. And if GWS win, they give themselves a chance of finishing top 2 and getting a home qualifying final if Port Adelaide lose the later game on Sunday afternoon. So both sides have plenty to play for. If I had to pick a side, I would slightly lean towards Bulldogs. However, that's not the way I'm looking at betting this game. I think this is a perfect game to take either side to win by 1 to 24 points. Can't see either side going on and winning this game by over 4 goals. Both sides, they beat up on bad opposition, but in their games against other quality sides, they're generally really close games. Majority of their previous matchups, aside from the one early this season where the Bulldogs won, GWS playing a lot better in better form now. You go back through the previous, GWS won by 5 points, Bulldogs by 15, Bulldogs by 5 points. So there's been a lot of fairly close games, and I think this is going to be another one of them. I think either side is going to win this by around the 10 points. Slight lean towards the Bulldogs at home, but GWS in really good form, and I think they keep this game really, really close. And both sides with plenty to play for. Neither's going to give up easily. The past 4 between these 2 sides have gone under the total at 163.5. They moved the number down 5. I think that is the right adjustment, especially as it's going to be a more defensive game, which also, supports that 1 to 24 option being a more closely contested, defensive-minded game. And I think that's the right move there with the total. So either side to win by 1 to 24 points as a try bet. Carlton take on St Kilda. The Blues are $1.72 minus 4.5. Interestingly, thankfully for Carlton fans, Fremantle losing their game last week has opened the door for Carlton. They just need to win this game to still make finals. St Kilda, however, are playing really well. They beat Geelong last week and have won 4 of their past 5. So it's not really going to be super easy for them by any means. It's not like they have a really easy matchup to achieve this. And St Kilda have won 6 of the past 9. They last met in round 21 last season, and Carlton won that game by 19 points as 8.5-point favourites. I haven't checked the injury list right now for Carlton off the top of my head, so lineups are going to be key for this game. But obviously, everything's on the line for Carlton. If they drop this game and Fremantle win the later game, then they'll be out of finals. So they definitely do need to win. I think Carlton do get over the line here. I think they have so much to play for. Season on the line, at home, they can get the win. So I'm looking at potentially taking Carlton to win, or either side 1-24. I think that's kind of the second way I'm considering playing it. St Kilda have been good, so they are a chance of getting over the line. Don't think if they win, they're going to win by more than 4 goals. That would be like crazy scenes if that did happen. But it's not an ideal situation for Carlton with their injuries and the trip back from Perth last week. Those factors don't set it up for an ideal situation. Thankfully, for their sake, they do have the 7-day turnaround playing on the Sunday to the Sunday. So that sets them up okay. And yeah, I think this is going to be a really close game. Lean towards Carlton to win, but also either side 1-24. Haven't decided right now which way I want to go, and it will depend on the final lineup for Carlton. With the total at 167.5, 5 of the past 7 between these two sides have gone under. I'd be leaning towards the under in this situation. Similar to the earlier game between Western Bulldogs and GWS, this matchup has to be more defensive-minded with so much on the line for Carlton. They can't afford it to get into a shootout, even though that's kind of where they can play their best. They're obviously undermanned in their forward half, so need to play defensive, and St Kilda are one of the best defensive sides in the competition, and we're getting a higher total than we've seen in the past 4. So that sets up well for an unders in that game. So they're the different ways I'm considering playing that matchup. And then final game of the home and away season, Fremantle take on Port Adelaide. Fremantle -2.5. They're small favourites here. If they win this game, they just need either Hawthorn, Western Bulldogs, or Carlton to have lost to have motivation to win. As we currently look at it, all those 3 teams are favourites. So I wouldn't be, rushing to bet into this game, because if they all win, then, there's no reason for Fremantle to win. Port Adelaide have slight motivation to win if we look at the ladder here. They're currently in second. So if GWS win or Geelong, rack up a big win against West Coast, then Port Adelaide would likely need to win this game to secure a top 2 and a home qualifying final. So as it currently stands, I'd be leaning towards Port Adelaide to win, especially as an underdog. We're getting, $2.07 for a top 3, top 4 side, potentially a top 2 side to win, going against a side that's currently sitting outside the top 8. And Port Adelaide have won and covered 5 of the past 6 versus Fremantle. Their matchup earlier this season was only decided by 3 points, Port getting the win at home as a 22.5-point favourite. So yeah, for this final game, definitely leaning towards Port. We've got a low total, 159.5. 8 of the past 13 head-to-head have gone under. Don't really have any lean on the total as it currently stands. Now, so obviously, I said, depends what happens in early games will depend, who has motivation to win this game. So let's assume that Fremantle do need to win and they're inside the top 8. Then I'd be looking at either side 1-24. Fremantle will then keep this game close with plenty to play for, and can't see Port Adelaide losing the game by more than 4 goals if they were to lose. So that's my backup option if Fremantle are in a situation where they win and they're in. So quickly recap all the games. Melbourne versus Collingwood, lean towards Collingwood to win, slight lean on the under, and definitely targeting disposal players for both sides. Geelong versus West Coast. Geelong should win this game. Look for disposal markets for the Cats players going against West Coast. Richmond versus Gold Coast. Gold Coast target them in the second quarter. They have a big mismatch overall this season in second quarters compared to Richmond. And also disposal markets for the Suns players in this game. Hawthorn versus North Melbourne. Hawthorn should win this game. Total slight lean towards the over, but not a great deal of confidence and targeting disposals with Hawthorn players in this game. Brisbane versus Essendon. Lions should win. Target them in the first quarter of the first half. I think that's where they're going to get the jump over Essendon based on how their past two performances have ended, and also how they've been the whole season. But also, particularly when I say how they ended last week against Collingwood should really motivate them to start this weekend strong. And obviously, they do need to win to make sure they at least secure a home elimination final. Sydney versus Adelaide. Tricky game, this one, depending until lineups come out, as the Swans don't have anything to play for. Like Adelaide's team total to go over. Western Bulldogs versus GWS. I think this is going to be a close game. I like either side 1-24. Carlton versus St Kilda. I like Carlton to win this game, and either side 1-24 as a potential backup option. Also interested in the under 167.5. Final game of the round does depend on previous results, but do like Port Adelaide and either side to win by 1-24. That's how I'm looking at playing the final round of the season. I post all my bets in with the bet finders, which you can access through the description. That also gets you access to all the different tools I use to study, research, and determine my bets on the AFL. Use these for the past over 10 years now since I originally started building these, but it helps you go through, study teams' performances, and then make smart bets based on that. Like right now, if you've just been relying on, your memory of how teams have played, what happened last time, or, just where they sit on the ladder, or just any other things like that, where you're not actually considering all the facets of a team performance, then that's the reason, you're not being able to make the money you want from your betting accounts. So definitely check out the bet finders. Use them to make money betting. That's what they're designed for, and gives you much better picture on teams' performances that you can then use to make smart betting decisions. And this is the reason why I've been able to do this full time for the past 12 years. So with that being said, hope you guys enjoy the final round of the season, make it a winning one, and then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any videos for the rest of the season. And also post-season, I'm going to be posting recap videos to break down how teams have gone, what's happened, where the betting trends have been throughout the season. So all that information to sum up the season and prepare you guys to win next year and actually make significant profits of betting on the AFL. So thanks guys, talk to you soon.